It's taken me ages to do this because of an inherent sort of British reluctance to blow my own trumpet. In the end I thought, sod it, I'm going to blow my own trumpet. Because that's what you've got to do when you get back, and it's really important to use the Churchill name and the fact you've done the fellowship to blow your own trumpet, because you'll have a huge impact on the all work area. And it's also really important to take a deep breath before you go to blow your own trumpet, because people will really welcome you, and the name Winston Churchill will open a lot of doors, and you want to make the most of it. So my fellowship was around the idea of promoting parenting skills. So I decided to sort of look at where infant mental health interventions, because actually I remember my interview was asking me about what I would do to promote parenting classes, and I started off by saying, well, actually I don't believe in parenting classes, I think they're bosh. And I thought, well, I may as well be honest. Much to my surprise, I got it. And I went to look at infant mental health interventions, which is quite a common word now, but back then nobody had heard of it. Nobody had heard of infant mental health at all. There was just a few of us, people like Kathy, who were part of a movement called the Association of Infant Mental Health, trying to promote the idea of clinical work for very, very young babies, or even bumps, and their parents. So I wanted to go and look and see what was being done there, looking at exactly what had been evolved in the place where this had started, with this idea of applying attachment theory and psychoanalytic theory and various other forms of intervention to the early years had first been refined and researched. So I went to Michigan, where a lady called Selma Freyberg started the infant mental health movement, who was a social worker and a psychoanalyst. And I moved around various centres in Michigan. And then, at great self-sacrifice, I spent the rest of my time in New Orleans. It was terrible, really. I don't know how I managed. So I've tried to combine my presentation with a bit of sort of information, because you're actually going to be doing things in the field of infant mental health. And infant mental health is a rather odd thing, because the important thing about infant mental health is that we are trying to maintain babies on a trajectory towards the best possible developmental pathway that they can take, given their circumstances. And that's what George was talking about, because what WAVE is trying to do, and what all of us in early intervention are trying to do, is to get in on situations before they go wrong, so that people can make the most of their potential. And you all seem to be involved in that and have the same enthusiasm, and it's really important. I am pressing the right button. So these are the people I was able to meet, which won't mean anything to you, but it's sort of important to show that you can use the Churchill name to get in a lot of things. And when I went to Michigan, I wasn't planning to meet all of these, but people were so enthusiastic about what I was doing. I got introduced, I got taken to meetings, I got able to spend days with trainees, I was able to go on home visits, none of which I'd planned. But it just happens organically from being there. So if you keep yourself open and just grab every opportunity with two hands that comes, you will really make the most of your time. So this is just a sort of list. So this sort of varies between training schools, very specific projects to prevent violence and to mop up violence in New Orleans, where there's a lot of violence, to more sort of strategic places like 0 to 3, which is the pressure group for early intervention in America. And I came back with this set of basic beliefs that support all forms of early intervention. And this is what keeps us going. We all believe that early development, you know, those first few years are really important, and it's the quality of the relationship in those first few years that will sculpt the brain that George talked about. The brain is a social organ. The brain is designed by nature to change its structure in response to close and caring relationships. That's how psychotherapy and counselling works in later years. It's not all or nothing in babyhood, but in babyhood you have the time of maximum brain adaptability, because that's when the brain is being put together. And the birth and care of a baby gives everybody a new chance, and you're all in the early years, and you know that, because when you've got a new baby in the system, you've got a lot of change happening naturally. You've got the change within the family as it readjusts and readapts to this new little person. You've got a new person changing and growing, and you've got a brain system that's changing as well. And actually there's been some recent research that shows that parents' brains go completely squidgy and reorganise around the times of birth. So you've got lots of things changing, and it's easier to work with a system in a process of flux than it is to work with one that is fixed. I'm not going to go for everything because I've only got 10 minutes. The attachment paradigm is the one that we use to think about this, but attachment is not the only way of intervening. It just gives us a language of relationships. So it is really important to be au fait with the language of attachment, and you'll probably find that this is a lingua franca wherever you go when thinking about babies. It certainly was the common language in America. Attachment and a sort of psychodynamic outlook and child development. Infant mental health specialists, well, you're all infant mental health specialists. That's what you're doing. You're all thinking about the early years and how what happens in the early years is going to make a difference. And just being as part of a system, being a new part of a system, being non-judgmental, being able to help people think about what's going on is going to change the dynamics in that system. And there's a good quote here, which is completely lost, from an American. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And that's something that's at the basis of all we do. So I looked at techniques. I was able to witness and sit in on very many things, and that was quite important, just to get the flavour of the work. I looked at some tools for assessment, which I brought back, although I tend not to use them very much now, but introduced them into this country. These are just sort of technical tools which are still in vogue, which you can use for looking at early intervention and looking at what's needed. But just seeing things and joining in with things and bringing back these things and writing them up is important. And then I looked at treatment and interaction guidance. It's known in this country mostly as video interaction guidance, but actually just interaction guidance refers to video feedback to help parents look at themselves from the outside and see what they're doing and think about how their actions have an impact on the baby. So I was able to observe that, actually where it started. Developmental guidance and speaking for the baby, very similar. They're helping parents think about what's going on in the baby from a developmental perspective, so they're not totally out of kilter with the baby. And again, we're all doing that. We're helping parents tune into their baby, but to tune in you have to have a basic idea of what's happening now, but also what's just about to happen. So seeing these processes in action. Watch, wait and wonder is an evidence-based technique which quite a few in the audience will know about. And that's helping parents to follow the baby's lead by virtually asking them to switch off their own initiative and to really focus on the baby, think about what the baby is doing and what the baby is demanding of them. And some parents find that very difficult. And interestingly, Shirley knows far more about this than me, some babies I've noticed also find that very difficult.
So do some therapists.
Do they? That's all I can say. I'm sure nobody in this room. Infant parent psychotherapy. Sorry, the picture's gone wonky. Infant parent psychotherapy. That's sort of a more psychodynamic approach. I come from a psychodynamic background, and that's looking at what gets in the way of parenting in terms of conflicts from the parent's own emotionally troubled past that are getting put onto the baby. So when you work with a mum who comes in and looks at the baby and says he's only crying because he hates me, or he reminds me of my dad, and you know her dad was an abuser, there you have a ghost in the nursery, and you know that if you don't intervene, that relationship is going to be distorted by this parent's fantasy being put onto the baby, because babies have this habit of living into expectations, don't we all? These are the key messages that I brought back and have been promoting ever since, to the point of probably absolute boredom for some people, because I tend to bang on about it. It's early interactions, early relationships that are the most important aspect of a baby's life, and that will carry that baby forward into their future. And the quality of caregiving, which is what we're all trying to optimize, almost becomes internalized and is the architecture of the baby's brain reflects the quality of the early caregiving. And once you've got that in your head, in spite of all the recent criticism of that, once you've got that in your head, it really gives you the biggest possible incentive to move forward. And it's also very useful information to have when you're talking to commissioners. So this is what my fellowship has led to. So no pressure. It was circulated through AIM, became a resource at the turn of the century for developing infant mental health. I led and set up an infant mental health service in Gloucestershire. From what I was learning and specialising, I supervised health visitors. I worked in the neonatal intensive care unit. I continue to be involved with the Association of Infant Mental Health. I represented infants on Young Minds when they had a policy and advisory group. I speak ad nauseum across the UK, frequently a double act with George. It's a killer double act, just in case you want to invite us. I've been teaching family court judges about brain development, and that's actually led to changes in the law to do with adoption. And I've sort of published the odd paper here and there. I'm clinical director of PIP UK, which any of you can get involved with if you want to set up your own infant mental health service. I've brought some handouts at the back just because I found in my study at home I had various bits and pieces that might be useful, and I've included my sort of business card there. If anybody wants to be on my infant mental health mailing list, where you'll get sort of updates and details of research and just anything that's happening in the world, because people send things in and I send things out, please just pick it up and email me, and please feel free to use me and pick my brains when you're setting up your fellowship. If you want to bounce ideas off anybody, I've always got plenty of time for that. And as George said, he dragged me in. I was part of the all-parliamentary group on building Greater Britons, which is this really important. I think you can be able to get this presentation, and that's a really important resource that you can use. It sort of summarizes and pulls together in a very coherent and sort of balanced way the evidence for early intervention, beginning at conception and moving up for the first, from the next 1,000 days after that. So none of these would have happened if it hadn't been for the Churchill Fellowship. So thank you to the Churchill Fellowship.
Thank you.